recalibrated Security Council. That's a whole story we won't go into. Within the General Assembly, meantime, we need an agreement amongst member states, including the Arab states, including Iran, Turkey, Egypt, and on the line G77 countries, that a non-violent resolution is urgently needed. And I do not mean another piece of paper, but a modern, no strings attached, Marshall Plan type investment in people. Today, Washington gives Israel some $5 to $10 billion per annum, and most of this money goes into military hardware. What a waste. To make peaceful coexistence a reality, what Palestine, inclusive of Israel, requires is massive investment in people via infrastructure, including housing, education, healthcare, industry, and agriculture, and employment, to begin the process of building equal peoples, equal prosperity, and equal human rights. Now, I'm going to add something controversial, but surely we can visualize, under the circumstances, that one state, a modern, secular, federal democracy, with full recognition of minority needs and space for the orthodox and fundamentalists of both communities to be secure and equal. The right of return, now only enjoyed by the Jews, must be extended to the Arabs and facilitated by the plan's financial and other resources. Apartheid, like divisions, would have to end. Jerusalem would have to be shared. Religious tolerance would be a must, and government would need to be representative. You think that's impossible? Well, I'm sure there would be resistance on both sides, but it would pass, just as the two-state solution has in reality passed, due to the demolition by Israel of the Arab community and the infrastructure of the West Bank and East Jerusalem in particular. Some 500,000 settlers, as you know, have been encouraged to intrude, whilst the critical underground water supplies of the West Bank are being diverted to Israel. Walls separate farmers from their land, breadwinners from their employment, and family members from each other. It's the alternative that is impossible: military occupation, illegal use of weapons, humiliation, and continuous violation of laws governing occupation. That's impossible. Because one danger is that if there is no peaceful resolution on the horizon, others in the region may resort to military aggression, including the kind of nuclear threats, or worse, favoured by the United States and Israel today. And surely no sane person wants that either. The alternative, may be imperfect for both Israelis and Arabs, but a compromise would appear to be the only way forward. The negatives of Israeli occupation of East Jerusalem, West Bank and Gaza will not go away, it seems to me, any day soon. In Ireland, we still recall with bitterness the British plantations of the 16th and 17th centuries. The Irish diaspora of today still reflects the occupation of Ireland. The genocidal famines of the mid-19th century grew directly out of the theft of Irish land. The human rights violations that came with occupation haunt Ireland still, and it'll be no different for the Palestinians of the territories occupied by Israel today. If genuine peace is not realized, I fear that through the use of violence, the Palestinians will obtain their freedom and independence. And I think that is not our recommendation, not my recommendation at least. Now, those of us outside the region, however, cannot want peace for our Arab and Jewish friends in Palestine more than they want it for themselves. It is they who need to understand that violence is not the best way forward. It is they who need to see that investment in people, in human well-being, and in the end of occupation is essential for survival. As the Mahatma Gandhi said, if we are to teach real peace in the world, and if we are to carry out a war against war, we shall have to begin with our children. And to a certain extent, that is exactly what's happening with the bereavement group that I mentioned, that I met last night in London. They're working on the next generation. Palestinians have been refugees, or in fact more correctly, they have been internally displaced persons in their own land of Palestine for generations. It's late, very late, and perhaps it never It's never too late to encourage Palestinians and Israelis to imbue in their children a love and understanding of peace, for which, as Gandhi said, consciously or unconsciously, the whole world is hungry. To succeed after so much failure, and to be so close to midnight, this peace must be facilitated in every possible way, without exception, by the entire international community, the same United Nations community that created Israel in Palestine some 60 years ago. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Denis. We will have time for questions and answers with our entire panel at the end. We'll move on to our next speaker, Nobel Peace Laureate and co-founder of Peace People Northern Ireland, well known to you all, Mairead Maguire. Mairead is going to speak to us about her own personal experience of the blockade, but also to talk about your experience of the flotilla and why you decided to join the flotilla. Mairead, thank you.
My dear friends, it is with a very deep sense of humility that I dare to stand at this podium to talk about Israel and Palestine. I'm not from that region. The politics are so deeply complex. But why I come is because I love the Israeli and the Palestinian people. Because they're suffering so much and it has gone on for so long. That if there's anything any of us can do to be in solidarity with all those people working on the ground in both Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territories, then I feel that we have to do it. Much as ill-equipped that we are, and much as we will make mistakes and say the wrong things and don't understand the history, it is paramount that we try to understand. And that's why I'm here. There's one thing we all have in common in this room, that we see the politics different, we have maybe different ways of trying to deal with it. We're here because we care. And there are people here, both Israelis and Palestinians background, Arab, Jewish backgrounds, and they care very, very deeply about what is happening. So I think that if we come at it from that angle, then maybe by some kind of blessing we will see a way through what is happening in the Middle East, and there will be a peace that can come out of it. In Northern Ireland in 1976, we were on the brink of civil war, and there are many people in this audience who are far too young to remember 1976. But it was very bad, and we didn't know how to get out of it. Because when people are caught in what is a very deep ethnic, political problem, very complex, with its roots far in the history, sometimes the fear becomes so deep that we just can't see a way through it. You see, we're all very human, and we're all, if we're honest, very afraid. And our deepest fear is our fear of embarrassment. We might say the wrong thing. Our fear of ethnic annihilation is, I believe, the very deepest of one of our fears, apart from our fear of death. And when you come out of a situation that you live in Northern Ireland, you understand the politics of ethnic annihilation, because we lived that in our situation in the North. And when people put so much into their identities, their flags, their religions, their countries, that they identify themselves against someone else, then they can become murderous. So what happened in Northern Ireland, what's happening in Israel and Palestine, what's happening all over our world is that somehow we have limited our vision and put it in to land and flags and cultures and religions. And it's only when somehow we begin to move above those divisions and see from a higher perspective, if you want, orientate yourself and your mind's eye higher than this thing that makes us kill each other. Because it's only when we rise to that kind of a vision that we perhaps, as God help us, the human family, will see a way through. Now, when I first went to Israel and Palestine many years ago, it was at the invitation of the Rabbis for Human Rights and against the demolition of Palestinian homes. And I was shocked when I went and I seen what was happening there. The Palestinians were losing their homes. Their homes were being demolished. I was shocked when I seen the politics on the ground of what was happening and the fear that was there. I was shocked when I met young Jewish and Israelis who had never, ever gone over to the West Bank, who didn't understand how I could come from Belfast and go to a village in the West Bank where you had all the terrorists. But I understood that fear because I came from West Belfast. And we had that fear in West Belfast. But until people begin, with Israelis and Palestinians, until they begin to be able to come together and to recognise their common humanity and the problems they're faced with, and the politics that they have got so utterly confused, only then can they see that way through it. It won't happen if they're the enemy, they're the good guys, they're the bad guys. It won't happen. So I am pro-peace, I am pro-Palestinian, I am pro-Israeli, I am pro-people struggling to build a new humanity built on international law and human rights. Because if we don't do that, we will surely destroy ourselves. So the struggle going on in Israel and Palestine and all over our world, to me, is exciting. It's challenging. I hope I live to be 100 so I will see the changes that your generation will make, because you have to go beyond all these labels and barriers, your generation. And it's going to be a tough struggle, but you can do it. So when I went to there, and I kept going back, and I went to the occupied territories, I went to Ramallah, and I walked in Berlin up to the wall with the Palestinians, with the Israelis, with the internationals, with the young, with the old, with the women, with the children. And we walked to the wall. Why? Because the wall is illegal. And we walked to the wall. Why? Because for Israeli soldiers to come across that wall into villages where Palestinian people's homes are being demolished and their villages destroyed, and they can't pick their olive groves, and their land is being stolen, because everybody has to stand on the side of human rights and justice. You have to take a stand. You see, it's all very well saying,